Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today's webinar, Content Without Clicks, during which we're going to be talking all about how you can make your content discoverable wherever your audiences are. So this is a super topical issue right now for anyone in the marketing and digital content space. I'm sure we're all wondering how we can do this. And so thank you for joining us. And it's really evident just how topical it is in the number of people that we have here today. So thank you again for taking the time. I hope you get some great tips and advice from our expert speakers that we've got with us today. So on that note, I'll just introduce you quickly to your hosts today. So I'm Lorna Hegarty. I'm the Content and Comms Director here at Squiz. And all the challenges we're going to be talking about today are really very familiar. These are all the things that me and my team are contending with. And so I'll be here just to share some of how we're starting to tackle them. I'm joined by the amazing Toby Margetts, a digital consulting director at Squiz, who's working closely with a number of customers all the time to help them understand and overcome their digital challenges. And this topic, I can imagine, Toby, is right at the top of the list of those discussions at the moment. So I know that you'll have some really useful insights to share there as well. And last but not least, we have our special guest today, who is Brian Gibson. Brian joins us from a digital marketing agency and analytics platform Digivisor, where he's head of digital strategy. Now, Brian's really deeply in the trenches of all of this and really heavily involved in understanding what the space looks like in terms of both how we can create the best content for both SEO and the new emerging AI platforms. So thank you, Toby and Brian, for being here with me today.
Thanks for having me.
Pleasure.
Just some quick housekeeping before we get into the content. We are recording, so we'll be sending you the link and follow up. You can revisit it at any time. If you have any questions, please do just pop them in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. We will hopefully have some time at the end to visit those. Anything that we don't get to during the session today, we will follow up with in writing as part of our follow-up comms, so keep an eye out for that as well. And if you have any tech issues or just anything that you want to raise with the panelists today, please do just pop that in the chat. We'll keep an eye on that as well. And if anything arises, we will address it there. For anyone who is new here and not familiar with Squiz, here's a quick intro to who we are, what we do. We are an AI-powered digital experience platform. We've been around since 1998, so we've been here a little while, and we now have offices all around the world. Our mission really is to make it easy for marketers to build, optimize, and manage digital experiences, which also then frees up their developers to innovate. We see the challenges that marketing and digital teams are facing at the moment when it comes to content discoverability. And ultimately, we know that ensuring that your audiences can find your information wherever they're searching is our number one priority. So that's exactly why we're here and exactly why we're making sure that we're supporting our customers on this journey with the tools and team that we have. So we thought it'd be good to kick off with a big stat here that really brings home what we're talking about today. 90% of the pages that ChatGPT cites actually rank outside of Google's top 20 results. So what does that mean? Really, this proves that traditional SEO success doesn't actually equate to AI search visibility. You will see lots of people saying, if you can just do SEO really well, that will really help you with your visibility across AI search platforms as well. But the reality is that you could rank number one on Google and still be completely invisible to ChatGPT users. So the two channels are using different ranking signals. And so optimizing for one doesn't actually guarantee performance in the other. How you fill that gap is exactly what we're going to be talking about today, and how you can find a way to ensuring that visibility across both channels and then really understanding the performance of your content in them as well. So how are we going to do that? There's 5 key things we're going to be covering today. The first being the new content discovery landscape, so understanding what things actually look like. Then a bit of an understanding of modern content quality considerations, what you can be doing to develop better content. What your optimization choices are right now. So we've talked a lot about SEO, GEO, everyone's talking about it. What does it actually mean? How to be discoverable without actually having a massive team. So dispelling that myth that to be able to do this, you have to hire a whole load of new people. And then how, of course, you can measure your success going forward. And without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Toby to take us straight into that topic of the new content discovery landscape.
Nice one. Thank you very much, Lorna. And yeah, hi, everybody. Great to have you with us today. We are undoubtedly, I think, going through what I would describe as like a pretty major shift in how people discover content and get answers to their questions. If you're anything like me, you'll have probably spent the last 6 months or so deep in things like ChatGPT and Copilot and being increasingly impressed with just how amazing it is and how much your life can change. I think actually that sounds like a bit over the top, but actually it makes some really like incredible inroads into productivity and yeah, just generally finding answers to questions in a much easier way. In terms of some stats that I think bear that out, although I think like often when we pull these up, nobody really disputes it because I think it's pretty accepted that this is the way that we're going. On the left-hand side there, you can see that nearly 60% of all Google searches now end without a click, which is amazing. And really, I think indicative of the fact that users are coming to Google, they're getting their question answered in Gemini, and they're leaving, which is great. It's such a short user journey. And so, yeah, click-through rates across Google are absolutely plummeting. And I think without wishing to generalize, we definitely are seeing that skewed a little bit more towards younger audiences, but we are absolutely seeing that behavioral shift across all cohorts as well, albeit a little bit quicker amongst younger demographics. The one in the middle there, that's SEMrush. According to SEMrush, we've got about a 4.4 times higher conversion rate when users use AI search compared to traditional site search, which is really interesting and I think starts to get the wheels turning in terms of how powerful a tool AI search can be for converting users to do something. And finally, on the right there, 2028 is the year that AI search is predicted to surpass traditional search, which is interesting. And I know, Brian, I think you've got some thoughts on that 2028 stats. Am I right?
Yeah, it's interesting, Toby. We've been talking a lot as a team the last couple of weeks, especially since Google has launched AI mode. I'm not too sure whether it's launched over in your part of the world, but in Australia here, they launched last week AI mode across all search and all devices. And it's really bringing ChatGPT, Gemini, Perplexity style conversational search in our faces in Google search. So I think based on that and the fact that generally when Google makes a move, people follow and start doing things the way Google expects them to. I think we're going to actually see that probably come back a couple of years or maybe the end of next year or something like that when people are actually starting to use that type of search style more than kind of search querying.
100%. Yeah, couldn't agree more. So yeah, the customer journey is undoubtedly changing, as we've just discussed. LLMs like ChatGPT, probably the most common one that people know, Copilot. We're seeing just really enormous growth in user bases. And virtually, I would say every customer, more or less at Squiz, is telling us that they're seeing a bit of a surge of traffic referred from places like ChatGPT and from Copilot. And I really don't think this is just a trend. There are a lot of things when you work in tech that kind of are trends that come into vogue and disappear 6 months later. But I actually really think this is a pretty fundamental shift in how user journeys are happening online. And the crucial thing is that we really need to be ready for it. Earlier, we talked about there being this kind of nearly 4.5 times increase in conversion rates when users have engaged with AI search. And I think that's down to the fact that users are typically arriving on websites now much further along the decision-making process because where they've come from, like they've come from ChatGPT, for example, they've done a lot of research there, they've come to a site, they're much more ready to engage or to convert or to do some kind of behavior. And that means I think that there are really two big opportunities here. So the first one being when users are researching or gathering information about your organization or services through an LLM, your website is absolutely going to be the most authoritative source of information about you. Getting your content in shape so that the information that is served to users is accurate and complete is really crucial as part of that. And we're going to talk a lot about that throughout the webinar today. And number two, there, the other kind of opportunity is to really look at your site and to assess how optimized it is to handle these users that are looking to take action, who are looking to convert. So yeah, we're going to talk about that quite a lot as we go through today. I'm going to hand over to Lorna now, who's going to talk a little bit more about these challenges. Obviously, Lorna is perfectly placed to be talking about these challenges, given the role that she does at Squiz, and yeah, generally how we can make them less overwhelming and less daunting. So yeah, Lorna, over to you.
Thanks, Toby. Yeah, so as Toby mentioned, this is very much the challenge that we're living at the moment. And I'd imagine that this graphic resonates with a few of the people who are in attendance today as well. There's so many things going on in the heads of content teams at the moment in terms of how we can develop content that is going to perform and is going to be engaging at the same time. We do have the things like SEO and GEO, which Brian will be talking to us in a bit more detail about shortly. But on top of that, we have readability and engagement. So it's all well and good structuring your content in such a way that it's really visible by AI search tools. But then if someone lands on the page and they're instantly bored or just are faced with a wall of consistently formatted text, they're not going to stick around and read what you've actually got to say. Of course, then we've got content analytics. We've been measuring the performance of content in the same way forever. So now having to think about how we can measure content through new channels and in new ways is something that we're always thinking about as well. User experience is an expansion on that readability and engagement piece, but beyond just landing on that one page and wanting to read the content there, you want people to actually then be able to complete the task that they've come for. And if that involves moving to another page, you need to make sure that, again, once they're there, they're really enjoying the experience on your site. And then finally, the last point there is really around accessibility and compliance, that yes, when we talk about this, we do mean WCAG standards, but we also just mean, is the information that you are putting out there really, truly accessible to everyone? At the center of all of this, obviously, is trust and authority. The reason that we're worrying about all these things is because we need to make sure that we're maintaining that trust with our audiences and building the authority in the places that they are looking for information. Now, the general perception is that to be able to do all of this, you need a huge team. You've got to invest in other resources. You've got to invest in upskilling. And I think there is a concern around that as well. One of the other things I wanted to share is how we're tackling content development using AI. So we're talking a lot today about how you create content that's discoverable wherever your audience is searching. We've obviously got tons of tips around that. But what I thought is also important to cover is how good content can actually be generated at scale with the help of AI. So again, looking specifically at how we're tackling it as a team. And a big part of that is really around developing deep, detailed, and reusable prompts that we can use in these AI content development platforms. We've talked in previous webinars about the importance of what you include in your content prompts. So I won't go into too much detail around the specific instructions. You can revisit our accessibility AI webinar for that one on the website. But what I really want to talk about is the kind of the consistency and layering that you can introduce to your prompting that will then help you to continue to produce better content over time. I like to call this our 5-tier cake, and it starts right at the bottom with the foundation layer. That's the stuff that never changes. So basically, every time we are creating a new piece of content, we will use this prompt that has these different layers. Foundation layer is the stuff about your business and your product that never changes. You don't want the LLM to stray away from this. You want it to be consistently true every time. Then we move up to the framework layer. So this is the brand guardrails. This is our language that we want to use, the readability level that we want to achieve, who we're talking to. But this is also where we build in the playbooks for things like SEO and GEO optimization in terms of the structure we're using, the language we're using, the content that's needed to be included for full discoverability. The next step is the customization layer, and this is really where you have to spend some time. So this is really about making sure that the piece is truly tailored to the specific audience and the goal of that piece. I really believe that an hour spent on a good prompt is a much more efficient use of time than just firing out a prompt to an AI content development tool and then having to spend hours editing it off the back. The next layer is the refinement layer. So this is where a lot of people actually will just stop, but this is really all about avoiding the AI slop that we're hearing so much about at the moment. Once you've got that first draft back, you have to iterate and refine it and make sure you're checking it for accuracy, make sure that it's still aligned to your brand for consistency. And then the top layer, the icing on the cake, as I like to call it, is the human input. We would, I think it goes without saying, and I'd hope it would be the same for everyone, we'd never publish anything straight from AI. Our team always reviews everything for accuracy, but also runs it through the SMEs in the business to make sure that it's really, truly validated. Now, you may notice I've talked obviously about the 5-tier cake, but there was no cake stand. So I'm adding in the cake stand as the last point, but it's really where we start every time, asking the LLM to tell us what questions it would ask before it gets started on the task. So in the same way that we would brief a content freelancer or an intern, we'd never just give the brief and hope that they get it. We'd always say, does that all make sense? Do you have any questions? So we're asking the same thing of the LLM to make sure that if there are any gaps, we're finding out about them before we get started on actually drafting the content. So hopefully that gives you a bit of insight into how we are starting to tackle things in order to actually add efficiency to our content development process here at Squiz. But I'm going to hand off to Brian to talk a bit about what we need to be thinking about when we're creating that content so that we are showing up wherever our audiences are searching.
Thanks, Lorna. Probably should just take a second to thank you and the team at Squiz for inviting me along to be part of this conversation. It's definitely an area that we are very passionate about at Digivise, and I spend a lot of time problem solving in this space. Yeah, jumping right in. So really trying to understand what are our content optimization choices in this rapidly changing environment. And I think we've probably been through more change in the last 12 months than potentially we've been through in the last 12 years in terms of this SEO and GEO space. So yeah, going to walk through how we think about it at Digivisor. I know the team at Squiz think about this in a similar way. Together, we're looking at how to balance the content that performs for humans and also for AI-driven discovery systems. So trying to explain where dual search optimization sits. So we all know SEO on the left there, it's about ranking in traditional search engines. But now we've got GEO, which is about discoverability in AI and LLM environments. So I like to think of it as pretty much a two-lane highway. SEO drives visibility in Google and GEO drives visibility inside AI answers. With dual search optimization, on the other hand, we can't choose one lane. We have to drive down both. So they actually complement each other. We often have people come to us. We have a lot of clients come to us at Digivisor. They've heard all the buzzwords. They're like, I want GEO, I want AEO, AIO for our website, whatever buzzword they've heard in the latest podcast this week. But when we do an audit of their SEO foundations, they're not quite there yet. So we find ourselves telling them, let's get SEO in great shape first and then layer in GEO on top. So it's a good illustration of why you need both. You can't just go, I'm going to ignore SEO and just focus on GEO. So in this dual search optimization stage, it's all about building visibility across both of those areas. The other big shift we see is we're no longer optimizing just for humans. We're optimizing for AI to be able to read our content and then essentially play it back to humans. It means that we need to make sure the AI can crawl and understand our content. And that's where things like schema, the structure of the content on the page, metadata, technical SEO all come in as part of GEO as well. It's just really an extension of what we're currently doing with SEO. In terms of kind of the next thing to think about is this convergence opportunity. The real sweet spot here is where we balance the needs of both AI and humans. When we get that balance right, everything starts working together. So instead of just optimizing for Google search, Bing, ChatGPT, Copilot, and so on, we start to think about what can we do to fix it once so that it performs across both sides of this optimization for AI and humans. So we want to do things like improve metadata, structured data, which helps both sides, enhance clarity and information gain, which is something I'll talk a bit more about in a minute. It boosts both your ranking within AI as well as organic search rankings, and thinking about further developing things like authorship, transparency, and the freshness of the content. And obviously we need to continue to optimize page speed and UX. It's going to help both sides, so help SEO, help accessibility, and also user engagement. So that's what we mean by this convergence opportunity. So now we're just going to talk through what this good content structure that we're talking about. You've probably seen some of these when you think about traditional SEO. So obviously we want to keep doing the traditional SEO things, but then extend that into more things that are for the AI, for the AIO side of optimization. Using proper headings, keep doing your H1, H2s, H3s, write in plain language that's easy for humans to understand, but obviously it needs to be easy for the AI crawlers to understand, marking up content properly. So things like your paragraphs, your lists, your tables, captions, quotes, anything like that. Make sure you mark that up in the HTML so that the crawlers know exactly what that content is. And then I guess the biggest shift is that we need to make, and you probably heard schema markup, this sort of thing's talked about a lot for a long period of time now, but it's really, there's no, we can't leave any gaps on that side of things. So we need to make sure that we get this schema markup right so that the bots that are crawling our site know exactly what your site's about. They don't read the visual content on the page. So I think if we go to the next slide, this is an AI generated image that I've created just to try and explain this concept that I have about schema as a whisper in the ear of crawler. So imagine you're in a different country, you're walking down the street, you see a poster on the wall or a billboard on the side of a building, and there's some writing on it. You don't know what it says. You don't understand the language. You've got a picture of a guy holding a microphone, and then you're just not sure what it is. And then someone comes along and whispers in your ear, oh, it's Coldplay. There's a concert. It's at Wembley Stadium. That whisper in the ear is the job that we need to do for the crawlers, because they don't look at visual things on a site. They don't look at the images so much, and they need to be explained exactly what it's about. So the markup there is just an example of where you've got, it's an event, the band's Coldplay, it's happening at this location, and so on. So that's, yeah, schema is a whisper in the ear of crawlers. So getting into kind of thinking about accessible content, it's definitely something we can't ignore. It's not just about inclusion and that side of things. It's about compliance, risk, and results. We all know the WCAG standards are becoming mandatory by 26, 27. The US Americans with Disabilities Act has skyrocketed. But the upside is that if you do this stuff well, if you do the accessibility improvements, they don't just protect you legally, they actually help improve your performance ultimately, because you're doing things that humans need to be able to better consume content. So we have seen studies showing that making content more accessible can improve task completion rates by up to 58%. So it's good ethics, good compliance, and ultimately it's going to be good for your business. So now I think I'm throwing back to Lorna. Are we at the stage of
Yes,
poll? Yep.
indeed,
Yep.
indeed. We're going to jump into the poll. So we're going to take a break from hearing from us, and we're going to ask you a question. We'd love to know what it is that you find is your biggest barrier to content optimization at the moment. So what are the things that are stopping you from being able to jump in and really make sure your content's optimized? There's 4 options there. Unfortunately, you can only select one. I'm sure a lot of people in the room would be wanting to tick at least a couple, but yeah, pick the one that stands out to you the most and we'll just see what comes out on top. It's always interesting with these polls to see if there's any discrepancies in the different regions that we operate in and we run these webinars in. So we're looking forward to seeing what comes out on top here.
Can I choose the same one 4 times?
And I'm sure, Toby, these are all resonating in terms of things that you're hearing.
Yeah, 100%. There's probably a couple in there that I hear, I'd say, more commonly than others. So it'd be really interesting to see what the results are.
Oh, so just out on top is time and resources required. Now, Toby, I'm sure, as you said, there's a couple that come up all the time. I'm sure that is definitely one of the ones that is always coming up.
Yeah, 100%. And that's the one that I kind of had earmarked to thinking that we would see that being a popular one. Yeah, it's a common concern. I think we see this across, not just talking about AI search. This is generally a problem across a lot of organizations that we work with. Having the teams and having the resources to dedicate to something which also feels like it's a big thing, like it's going to take a long time to do, is, I think, one of the key things. We'll talk about that a little bit. And actually, I think the following slide that we've got dovetails really nicely on from this, which is great. Yeah, not having the time, not having the resources to do that, it sounds incredibly daunting, I think, getting your content optimized. Particularly, we work with a lot of universities, we work with a lot of governments, we work typically with organizations that have like thousands, tens of thousands of pages of content. And I'm yet to meet a customer who has huge teams of content editors and subject matter experts sitting around twiddling their thumbs, waiting to be given things to do. If anybody is in that situation, I'd love to hear from you, but I doubt it highly. So yeah, it does feel like a very overwhelming thing. But the point is, or the point that I want to make here is that is okay. We typically encourage customers, as you can see on the slide here, to focus on 3 steps, which make this whole process considerably less daunting, less overwhelming. The first is around using technology to help you. So there are a bunch of really great tools out there now that can help you identify where and how to start. And I'll talk a little bit more about what those are on the next slide. The second is to take a thin slice approach, which again, I'll elaborate on this in a bit. But broadly, if you imagine your website as a full cake, we strongly recommend not tackling that whole cake in one go, instead breaking it down into much smaller chunks or slices and working through them systematically, starting with ideally the slice that you think is going to move the needle most for you or is going to have the most profound impact on the organization. And lastly, there as well, I think it's really important to make content optimization an ongoing process. It's often easy to do some work. Often, I'm sure everyone will resonate with the idea of you do a content audit, for example, that takes months and months, and you go, yep, great, done, content's in great shape. Nobody thinks about it for 2 years, and then you're back to where you were.
Yes, essentially what he's saying here is that making the most of content optimization or making sure that you're doing content optimization as business as usual has to be a kind of an ongoing thing. Ensuring that your content is optimized for maximum discoverability doesn't really ever end. But the following slides do go into this in more detail. So this first slide is all about that first point that Toby was making around how your digital tools there's many tools basically that you can use to identify what's working and what's not working so well on your site. So analytics tools will help you understand how page is performing. Accessibility auditors can help you see problems with semantic structure. And things like content auditing tools can help you spot broken links, duplicated or out-of-date content. And our own content auditor will break down your pages into content fragments and score them in terms of their suitability to be used in an LLM. So there's lots of tools like this that are coming out that can help you spot where the errors are across your content and therefore help you to understand how you can improve it going forward. The second point that Toby made there was that one of the fastest and best ways to ensure that your content is optimized for AI is to adopt an AI search or conversational search tool, as we call it, into your site. Essentially, one of the best ways that we think to be able to understand how your content, whether or not your content is optimized for AI, is to actually adopt an AI search solution within your own site. So we've got our own one, Squiz's conversational AI search, but I'll let you talk a bit more about what that is and how it works.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks, Lorna. So yeah, as Lorna pointed out, one of the fastest and best ways, I think, to ensure that your content is optimized for AI search or conversational search, as we typically call it. So we use Funnelback to ensure that only your content, or slice, as you've heard us talk about, is actually exposed to the AI. That's really important around what you actually want it to talk about. If someone asks a question that's outside of that scope, the bot won't hallucinate and won't make something up. I know that's often a critical concern when people have used things like ChatGPT and Copilot and are often used to getting what we would call like confidently crap answers, right? You get something and you know it's not quite right, but actually a lot of LLMs will have no qualms in delivering that to you. We have our own automated auditing tools, which are really cool. These give you like a really nice at-a-glance view of how fit your chosen content slice is for AI search, and also gives you some really nice tangible recommendations on how to fix those issues. That's crucial, right? It's one thing being told, hey, your content's not in great shape. It's another actually knowing what you then need to do. That's a really critical next step. And I think also one thing we like to do, we like to actually start testing your content with real user questions at a really early stage of the process to understand how capable the content is at answering the most common questions, and then obviously adjusting as necessary. So yeah, whether you implement conversational search or not on your site is one thing we always like to talk about. Hopefully it's clear that actually that's irrelevant in many ways. What is hyper relevant is actually the state of your content and how it's optimized for AI use. As I say, whether it's your own tool, conversational search, or whether it's ChatGPT, Perplexity, Copilot, pulling that information into their LLMs and delivering kind of answers on your behalf. This one is definitely worth reinforcing. So tackling your entire slice at once, I think that is what feels like the really impossible task, right? That's what feels incredibly daunting and overwhelming. As I said earlier, we really strongly recommend that you actually focus on an area that is a particular priority and start there in terms of assigning success metrics, actually understanding what it is you want to try and achieve, whether that's an increase in conversions, just a general improvement in how people are discovering content. There needs to be a kind of a reason for doing these things, right? It can't just be sort of cool tech for cool tech's sake, I think. Yeah, just to flip on to the next one, and again, to reiterate, most organizations, I would say it's fair to say, have a content problem. And content problems are notoriously difficult. They are daunting, they are overwhelming, and it's really easy, I think, to put them on the back burner. The trouble with that, though, is that the advent of AI means that the stakes have really been raised, and your content matters, I think, more than it ever has. Obviously, content has always been important, but in this kind of modern time of AI search, it really does matter more than ever. And I think moving towards a process, and we again touched on this a little bit earlier, of that continual optimization using the tools that we've discussed to get your teams, or rather to ensure that your teams aren't blindsided by problems in the future. That's a really good way of looking at this and making sure that you don't end up in a situation where you're having to do huge, overwhelming, daunting content sort of rewrites across huge swathes of your site ever again into the future. Here's a very quick example of how that kind of process could look in using a real world example, I guess you could say. This is something that we've come across quite frequently. Let's assume that you're a university. Obviously, I appreciate that you may not be, but using a series of tools, you've determined that your open day content perhaps isn't performing as well as you'd like it to. It's not really giving good answers via conversational search. You systematically review and tweak your open day related content with GEO in mind from the start, something that probably up until this point not many people have been doing. And you can measure the success of that, right? That's a really conversional, like a measurable thing. So for example, how many prospects were previously signing up to an open day, pre your new content, post your new content, how much better is it performing? We can say that post conversational search, we're seeing a 30% uplift in the number of people that are converting and clicking and going through and actually booking an open day. That's super crucial. I think that point I mentioned it earlier, not doing tech for tech's sake is always a really important thing. You've always got to be harking back to what actually is this doing for us as an organization. Yeah, so that you can ultimately look good to your boss and say, hey, we've implemented this thing and it's helped us move the dial in this way. That's ultra crucial. Okay, I think I'm going to hand over to Brian here to talk a little bit about measuring your success.
Yep. Thanks again, Toby. Yeah, so obviously this is a question that I'm sure that we're all asking at some point. So we've done all this work on the site. We've done our SEO, geo. We're in this dual search optimization state. How do we know it's all working? What measurement platforms could be used to do it? So there's some examples here of the things, the different types of metrics and things we're looking to determine the performance of all the work we've been doing. As an example, how do you know you've improved your visibility across both search ecosystems? We're lucky to have a tool at our disposal at Digivisor where you get SEO and AI influenced results and engagement results. You can use tools like SEMrush and Ahrefs. They're all starting to really build out their AI visibility tools. So there's a couple of tools you can use there. In terms of the next one, improving content performance and user management, you can keep using tools like Google Analytics. Once again, Digivisor's got tools where you can bring in your web analytics and start to see the performance, bounce rates, engagement rates, that kind of thing on your site to gauge the performance of the content once users arrive. Better insights to provide. How do you get much better insights so you can prioritize content development? So you can combine analytics from tools like SEMrush and we do a lot of real testing in AI chat tools now. So actually going to ChatGPT, into Gemini, into Perplexity, Copilot, and so on, ask them, what do you know about our brand? Who are the best providers in our industry? Perplexity is doing some amazing things now where you can tell it what questions users are asking in a specific topic area, and it'll list the most common questions, it'll list the most common citations, and ideally your website's appearing in amongst those citations. And then you can push it further by asking things like Perplexity, you can ask to track questions over time associated with your brand and competitors over time. What is the most common citations that it's finding within a particular topic space? Get that feedback from the actual AI LLMs themselves is really valuable to steer in the right direction. And then finally, how do you know you've achieved greater representation in those AI-generated responses? It's just about visibility and accuracy. So there are tools out there, like all the ones I mentioned, where you can actually see the results that are appearing in some of these platforms. But as I said, we do spend a lot of time going into the LLMs themselves and asking, when people search for this thing, who do you recommend, or which sources do you cite the most? And then I'll hand over back to you, Toby, for the next slide on ROI.
Yeah, sure. It's something I've mentioned on the previous couple of slides as well, but I want to say it again because I do think it's hyper important. In this kind of modern age where AI has become a thing very quickly and is pretty cool, it is super important, I think, to keep harking back to actually what is the ROI? Why are we doing this? And if the answer is we're doing it because it's cool tech and everyone else is doing it, we think we should be doing it, that's not really a good enough reason. And frankly, under those circumstances, there's not a lot of point. There has to be a point. There has to be an ROI. What I would say is, so conversational search as a general point has a number of potential benefits it can bring that can be measured, and that's crucial. To look at a few here, and this is not an exhaustive list, there are probably many more beyond this, but these are some of the ones that we work with customers most closely around. So number one is around reducing the cost to serve. That's a really key one. So for example, that might look like reducing call center volumes, for example, through increased self-service, the ability to find what you need. Perhaps if you're a local council and somebody needs to understand what days their bin goes out, and maybe they pick up the phone typically to find that out, or they've got a problem setting up their direct debit or something like that. The ability to go and get an answer to your question through AI versus having to pick up the phone, that results in huge cost savings, as you might imagine. It could even result in something like reducing the ability to have to go and print something, for example, which within, again, to use the kind of council example, across the board, that has some quite profound cost saving implications. Number two is general efficiency gains. Your staff or your users, for example, finding information more quickly, that can actually lead again to some quite profound sort of productivity improvements across big organizations, universities, governments, those types of organizations. If it doesn't sound like much, small ability to get something more quickly, find something more quickly over the course of time and thousands of employees, that really does add up to some quite profound improvements. And finally, there, number three, and probably, I don't want to say it's the most important one, but it's the one that I probably work most closely with our customer base around, because it typically, I think, tends to be the thing that people are most focused on. is around conversions. So maybe it's open day bookings if you're a university. Maybe it's, as I said earlier, signing up to pay your council tax via a direct debit if you're a local government. If your site is geared to convert users in any way, which most sites are, conversational search can definitely help that, and help that measurably as well. As I say, within any kind of answer that you might give with conversational search, you have control over the call to action that you might place in there, depending on the type of depending on the type of question that's been asked and the answer given. You have control over where and how those call to actions appear, and you can of course track click-through rates from that. You can completely compare them to previous traditional site search and see whether there was an improvement there. What I would say across the board is we are seeing much better conversion rates. And to hark back, I think, to one of the first slides we showed, where general data shows, I think, nearly a 4.5% improvement in conversion rates. That's definitely something that we're seeing both kind of anecdotally through work with our customers, but also we can bear that out in the data that we're seeing as well. Users are coming, they're at a much more advanced stage in their user journey. They're coming to the site and they're much more ready to convert ultimately. So we see much better results. And yeah, that I think is it from an ROI point of view. And I believe we have reached the end where we're about ready to take some questions, I think, Lorna.
We are indeed. Now we've got a few minutes left, and maybe if people are able to stick around, we can look at answering a few questions and going a couple of minutes over time. But I will jump into the questions that we've got, and we can just look at answering a couple as we go. Catherine's been in with a question around, Toby, this is probably best pointed to you. She's asking about, when you're talking about finding real user questions to use in an audit, how are you going about doing that? So I think this is around identifying the questions that you want to be able to answer.
Yeah, really good question. And there's a couple of ways to do that. One, and probably the best way, is to actually look at your analytics, right? To have a look at your back end and to see what questions are coming through in your analytics, depending on what kind of tool you're using. Funnelback, for example, has a really good kind of marketing dashboard, which will give you information on search terms that are being used, where people aren't getting results for certain things. You can quite quickly start to see patterns around the type of question that people are asking and are getting answers to, but also possibly more crucially, questions that they are not asking, that they are asking and are not getting answers to. So that's one way. There are a couple of other ways as well. It kind of gets a little bit meta, like using AI to help you figure out what those might look like as well. You can prompt it with something like, hey, here are a few pages of content. Could you generate me a list of questions that this type of user might typically ask about this type of content? That can lead you down some interesting paths. And I would strongly encourage you to have a human element there to vet those and to look at those. But that's quite a good starting point. If you can combine those two things, the AI to help you maybe think about some sort of slightly more out of the box questions, but probably more importantly is looking into your analytics to actually look at what real users are asking and how well they're faring with those questions currently, is a really good starting point.
All right, we will go. Thank you, Toby. We will go with one more question. And then, as I mentioned, obviously, there's been loads of questions. So thank you so much to everyone for submitting those. As I mentioned at the beginning of the session, we will be answering them all in our written follow-up content. So keep an eye out for that to make sure that you get the answer to your question. But Brian, I'm going to fire this one over at you. We will end things on this one. Let's say we go through these steps and optimize our content. How do we then gauge whether or not the content is actually ready for AI?
Yeah, a good question, that one. It's funny, Toby mentioned before, like I feel like the answer that I give most to my team when they come and ask me a question like this, ask the AI. Like the AI will tell you most of the time whether you've done all that work, whether it's ready or not. So ask it what it knows about what you've created and see how it interprets it. And then you'll gauge from that, especially when it comes to things like the schema markup and knowing whether there's any gaps there. Really just ask the AI what it knows about the page that you've created. And if it's aligned with what you've written or what you've generated, then you know that you've nailed it. We've got a set of LLM prompts that we've got, some standard prompts that we get up that we ask it to interrogate that and even look at the schema markup and that side of things. How well have we done our schema markup on this page? Are there any gaps? Are there any gaps in our content that we've written, that kind of thing? And it'll generally tell you what it's missing. So that's my short answer to the question.
Thank you, Brian. Short and sweet. Appreciate that. And thank you so much to everyone who has joined us today. We really appreciate it. And as I say, really appreciate all the engagement and all the questions. It's been a super fast-paced session. I think we probably could have done about 4 hours on all the topics that we tried to cover. But if you do have any further questions for any of us that you'd like to just ping us back directly, please do connect with us on LinkedIn, and then we will be able to chat to you directly there. So thank you, everyone, for joining. Have a wonderful day. and keep an eye out for future webinars. There'll be lots more to come.